compared to the things that I thought would exist when I was younger,
Yeah.
like what actually, I mean, we're really cool humans, and like technology is sweet, but like
no flying cars yet, like
Yeah.
no Jetsons.
exactly. My mom loves the Jetsons, so
Mhm.
I obviously
yeah.
didn't grow up with it, but she raised me on it. So I'm just gonna ask you to introduce yourself and start off, and then I guess I'll say hi to the camera because this is kind of like it's set up weird.
Yeah, cool.
So good morning. My name is Molly Schroeder, and I'm here with Miss Katie Lever. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Katie Lever. I am a PhD student here at the University of Texas. I'm also a former NCAA Division I athlete at Western Kentucky University, and we're going to be talking a little bit about my experiences today.
Awesome. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So I just kind of wanted to start off and ask you your relationship with sports growing up, and this can be anywhere from childhood to growing up. What have what was your experience as an athlete as well as just a regular sports fan?
Yeah, so I was an Army brat growing up, so my mom was like, she retired as a colonel, so like very strong, powerful woman in my life, and my dad, he actually raised my brother and me, so we had some kind of flip gender dynamics in the household. But my dad was always very much into the idea that, I could do whatever I wanted when I grew up, like that there were no limitations on me, so he pushed me into a lot of things. He pushed me to like Girl Scouts, and he pushed me to sports, and so he was just very open to whatever I wanted to do. So there were really no like gendered restrictions on anything, and so I just very naturally gravitated towards sports because my dad was a big sports fan. So like I remember growing up, we would have baseball nights when I was a kid, and we're big Atlanta fans, and so we would have these baseball nights where my dad would let me stay up past 10 o'clock, which was like a big deal, and so there's a lot of sentiment behind baseball and that fanhood with me, and so yeah, I would say that my identity as a sports fan and as an athlete like literally started at birth. And then my mom, she was also a runner at Western Kentucky, and my grandpa played football, so like lots and lots of legacy in my family. So we're just a very big sports family, and that's just something that's always been really encouraged for me.
Yeah, and so then I guess moving into when you were older and you did actually run yourself, then how did you make that kind of a decision, and what was it like going into it?
Yeah, so I, in high school, I actually started off playing softball. That was what I really wanted to go to college for. I was like, I'm going to be a pitcher, and I just love the game of softball, and I still do. I go to games all the time. But then as my career progressed, I was like, I'm not as good of a softball player as I thought I was, and I remember there was this one practice where I was running for a ball from right field. I dove into the second baseman, and she landed on my back, and so I ended up spraining my back, and I was out for a good couple of weeks while we waited for that to heal. And I lost my starting position, and I was really, really bummed because I was like, if I hadn't gotten injured, like I wouldn't have lost that position. And so what I was thinking in my mind, I was like, I've got to get fitter. And so that summer, I really committed myself to cross-country training because I was like, if I would have been, my logic was if I would have been more fit, I would have recovered from the injury quicker, and then I wouldn't have lost my starting job. And then I found out, oh, I'm better at running than I am at softball. Like, that's cool. And so I threw myself into running my junior year of high school, and then I started getting D1 offers around the end of that year. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, this is what I need to focus on. So I'm a big proponent for young athletes playing multiple sports at a young age because it's less wear and tear on the body. You don't get burned out. You see a lot of kids now who are playing like travel baseball, like travel softball, travel basketball at really young ages, and it's really horrible for the body when you do that because it's a lot of repetitive stress. And so I always tell people, I didn't really focus on running until my junior year of high school, and I'm glad that I didn't because specialization is actually not good for youth athletes. And so I was very much encouraged to play multiple sports growing up, and then I found one that I really, really liked and that I was good at later on.
So what was training like for you, and how did that sort of pressure from wanting to heal and getting fit play into the way you trained yourself and then eventually led into running?
Yeah, so athletic training, it's funny because athletic life is very, very glamorized. We see athletes on TV all the time and we think like, oh man, like their lives must be awesome. And there's a lot to like about being an athlete, but a lot of athletic life is very monotonous. It's a lot of repetition, it's a lot of early mornings, it's a lot of going to bed early and like eating the right foods. And so a lot of my pressure to train as an athlete was self-imposed. You know, my coaches were very good with me. They were just like, Katie, you know, like, we believe in you, like, you can do this. And I was just like, no, I can't. Like, I've got to train harder, you know. So I was always like, I was always that athlete who was kind of on the edge of pushing myself too hard because I felt a lot of pressure to live up to my own standards. And then I knew that going into college, I knew that I could earn that scholarship, you know, because there is also, athletic scholarships are also kind of mythicized. Most athletic scholarships aren't full rides, and a lot of people don't know that. I did not know that going into it, so I was like, I'm going to earn a full ride scholarship. And I didn't quite, but I paid for a lot of my education that way. And my little brother, I knew that his odds for getting significant financial aid weren't nearly as good, so that was something that really motivated me too. I was like, if I can, you know, if I can pay for my school, then whatever aid my brother Tim needs, you know, my parents can provide him if they need it. So that was a huge motivation for me too, was knowing that I could help my little brother out a little bit too.
Wow, that does sound really heavy, and it does put external pressure on you. Did you ever find yourself kind of at the edge? Is there one moment, or maybe a couple of leading moments, to where you had your brother riding off of, you know, that external pressure and your parents and just like your own standards, and maybe there was like a race or something specific that points out to you in your mind?
I remember, so there were, you know, it's funny, my biggest weakness as an athlete was my head, you know, because I was very disciplined, I was very dedicated, I was always going to show up early to practice and like run through the line and do all the things that athletes needed to do, but it was always my mind that got in my way. And so I remember, and it wasn't even like, I've got to run so that I can earn this scholarship, and like that wasn't, that in and of itself wasn't super motivating for me. Like, I knew I needed it, so it was in the back of my mind constantly, but I was always like, I want to win, you know, like that was my mentality, like I want to win all the time. And that was, ironically, like that was what crippled me as an athlete. And I remember that in high school, so I was ranked 6th in the state when I finished up my senior cross country season, and so we're going into state, and I'm like, I want to win. I didn't win. I got 6th, so I was like, dang it, I ran my rank, and I was not happy with that. And then that spring season, I was ranked #1 in the state in the 2-mile for track, and I placed 8th in the state. And so it was like, but I remember I was in my own head the whole time, like my stomach was just in knots because I was really anxious about it. And so that was, like, I was a very anxious athlete, which is something that's kind of an oxymoron. Like, we think of athletes as having all this confidence and like, oh, they, you know, they believe in themselves, they've got all this swagger. I was not one of those athletes, and honestly, a lot of athletes are like that, very anxious, very insecure, like, just constantly needing to prove ourselves. So a lot of that pressure is internal as well.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So regarding to that, how did you sort of prepare for a single race, or, you know, what was your relationship like with other athletes on the team?
So in preparing for a race, I always had routines and rituals that I would go through. I was pretty superstitious as an athlete too. So I would always, I would always go to bed super early the night before. Like, I had certain, and as a runner, like, what you eat before a race is very important. So there were certain foods I was like, I can't eat this before a race. Like, that's not good. That's going to upset my stomach. And then as far as like my relationships with my teammates went, I actually really regret not forming better relationships with my teammates because I was so focused on winning. You know, I was like, anything I can do with my teammates is kind of like a cherry on top. And so I didn't like go out with my teammates and have fun. You know, so there were certain things I didn't do because I was like, if I go to this party, then, you know, I'll still have to get up at, you know, 5:30 for practice tomorrow, so I'm not going to do that. You know, so I was very disciplined to a fault. And I actually really regret not forming better relationships with my teammates just because I was so, like, blinded by that need to win.
Did you feel a lack of community at that time?
I don't know if it was a lack of community. But the thing, so I'm going to go back to athletic scholarships now. Because another thing that kind of created fissures in my team is the fact that athletic scholarships are not guaranteed in college sports. So the way that they work is you sign a contract at the beginning of every season. And so it's not like you get a 4-year deal, like you sign your freshman year and then you're good to go. You sign this contract at the beginning of the season. And that your scholarship value can change. And so you always know, like, oh, if I don't shape up, like if I don't maintain this, then my teammate's gonna get my scholarship. So there's this very underlying level of toxicity there where you know you can't really be on the same team with everybody, you know, because they are financial threats. And that is something that I'm still kind of coming to grips with, you know, in forming relationships with people. I'm like, okay, this person is not in competition with me, you know, and so that's something that's kind of been a struggle for me leaving college sports, is leaving that mentality behind and understanding that not everything is a competition. I can let my guard down around people and form relationships.
Wow, so that sort of manifested in your personal life, even though it stemmed from sports.
Yeah, because, you know, we talk about athlete identity, and identity is something that is so amplified, I think, for athletes in their sport. Like, we really define ourselves by our performances and by who we are as athletes. And that's something a lot of athletes struggle with when they leave college sports, you know, because it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've got to be like actual adults now, like we've got to have a day job, you know, and so, which is why I study sports, because I'm like, I don't want to leave that behind, you know, it's like I always want to be in this arena, even if I'm critical about sports. But that identity is so, it's just so deeply interwoven to who you are as an athlete. It's really hard to detach from that.
Yeah, so tell me, once you stopped running track, how you had that manipulating your own life, and how you did keep that in your studies and everything as a student.
Yeah, so one thing that running did not do well for me is that I was always injured as an athlete, and so I wanted to stay active after I graduated, but I was like, I don't want to run, you know, I was like, I don't think I want to run anymore, because I had a lot of hip issues, back issues, knee issues, and so I was like, I want to get into strength training, you know, like I want to be strong and to be able to lift heavy things, and so I started weightlifting on my own, and then in grad school, one of my friends was like, hey, have you tried CrossFit? And I was like, no, like I'm not one of those people. But he was like, just try it, like come to my gym. If you don't like it, you know, they don't charge you and you can leave and never talk to them. And I was like, okay, fine. So I went to a couple of CrossFit classes and I was like, okay, I really like this. And so I started CrossFitting in 2016. And that's something that stuck with me, and I love strength training. I still run like once a week, maybe like 30 minutes, but like I still love being active and working out. And then in my studies, I'm actually very critical of the NCAA in my studies now because of my experiences as an athlete. And I thought that, you know, going into grad school, I was like, I don't know if this is going to help my research because I'm kind of biased, but it adds a flavor to my research. Like it makes it personal and it makes it it gives my research more stakes for me. It's like I'm doing research about something that was not necessarily as good for me as it should have been. I'm learning more about the NCAA and how harmful it is as an organization. And that's something that I want to share with people and say, hey, you know, you see this image on TV, you see the NCAA's PR online. It's not everything that it looks like. And so I do bring that critical perspective because I want to give people an accurate depiction of what life is really like in the NCAA.
So knowing that you were an athlete and that is sort of a personal thing and you bring that into being a student, that's interesting. Can you tell me a little more about things you've researched and how being an athlete yourself has impacted that research?
Yeah, so I know for a fact that I wouldn't be nearly as critical about the NCAA if I hadn't been an athlete myself. And something that's really refreshing to me is talking to other athletes and having that mutual feeling of, oh yeah, like I'm critical of the NCAA too. It's like, okay, cool, I'm not alone. I wrote a paper last semester on the ideology of the word student athlete and the history of that term and all of the and just being very critical of it. Because the word student athlete is one of those words that a lot of people throw around without knowing the history behind it, but it's strategically designed to deflect from the issue of workplace rights. And so by framing college athletes as students, the NCAA denies them any kind of workplace benefits, the right to unionize, things like that. And those are things that, people don't really think about. Like, we say student athlete all the time, like analysts use it all the time. Even these bills that are being passed designed to grant college athletes name, image, and likeness rights, they all use the term student athlete. And I'm like, that drives me nuts because it's such an ideologically loaded term. And so having experiences as a college athlete, I can bring a level of credibility to that research and say, like, hey, I've been here, this is why you shouldn't use that word, because these are my lived experiences, but here's the research that underlies it too.
Wow, that is something pretty serious. So going past that, did you feel yourself losing a part of who you were when you stopped running track?
Yeah, and it's interesting the way that you say it, losing a part of who you were as an athlete. Because, it's a very, very quick transition, because one day, you're competing at conference, you're competing at regionals or whatever level you end up on, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're done, like you're graduated, it's a very, very stark transition, and it feels a lot like losing a close friend, because it's just like, it's not there, you'll never see it again in the same way. You'll never be able to step on that line as a college athlete and to run for your team and all of that. And there is a lot of baggage that comes with being a college athlete. There's just a lot of stress and anxiety and fear and insecurity and all the things that we talked about. But it's exhilarating too, at the same time. It's like, it's very exciting. So that's kind of a tension that I've had to manage, because I always tell people, like, I was a distance runner in college, but I never want to run another 10K again. But I miss it, part of me, even years later, even with all the critical research that I've done, it's like, I miss it. Like, I miss that runner, Katie, who could just get up and run like 8 miles and like that was nothing. Because I definitely couldn't do that now. I'm like, I don't want to run 8 miles. And I don't think I physically could. So now I'm having to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, like runner Katie is gone. Like, you can't do the things that runner Katie could do, but like runner Katie also couldn't squat the bar in the gym. So I'm having to constantly reframe that and say, like, okay, runner Katie, she wasn't as smart as you are now. Like, runner Katie wasn't doing the things that you're doing now. Runner Katie was stressed and anxious and didn't have, a social life. So I'm having to find ways to come to reality with who I am now, because that's who I'm going to be in the future. And so it's kind of, it is this detachment of like who you are as an athlete versus who you are becoming. And there's a lot of uncertainty involved, but it's also exciting, and it's something that I'm kind of learning and unlearning every day.
Wow, that's really interesting how you frame that as old Katie, being in the third person and feeling so detached from that. So what do you do now in your daily life? Like, in a week, how much would you say that you train or work out? How do you keep that in your life apart from your studies?
Yeah, so it's actually funny. I'm not competitive with it anymore. I don't know if I want to, because like there are competitions and things I could enter in terms of CrossFit and weightlifting, and I'm just like, I kind of like, part of me wants to dabble in that, but then part of me is like, I don't know. But one thing that's really nice about being like having agency over your fitness now is that I can, if I want to go to the gym and work out for 20 minutes, I can. It's like if I want to take a day off, if I need an extra day off in a week, I can take it. So there's not this performance expectation to it. So I've really made fitness my own thing now, which is really, really nice, because we talk about the competitiveness of college athletics and all the baggage that comes with that. And so it's nice not to have that pressure. It's nice to not have to fit into like a spandex uniform, because eating disorders are a big issue with college athletes, especially women. And that was something that was really, really toxic on my team. We had like this eating disorder culture that was just really, really messed up. But we had all these pressures to look a certain way, because female athletes have a lot of external pressures on us. I always tell people that female athletes have to do everything that the guys do, but we have all of these weights on our shoulders. Like, we have societal norms, and we have, you know, sexist sports bros who think that they can do everything that we do, and I'm like, you can't. You know, we have all of the beauty standards, the external pressures of just being a woman in sport, where, you know, a lot of people argue like women don't belong in sports. And so women just have to work harder in athletics, and I'm sure that that bleeds onto the field of reporting as well.
Would you ever say that you were personally treated differently for being a woman?
I would say yes. There were, and I still deal with kind of that low key sexism that comes with being a woman who studies sports. One incident that I really clearly remember where I felt like I was being treated different or being looked at in an inferior way was, it was my senior year. We were running mile repeats on the track, and we had to share it with ROTC sometimes because they would come and do their mile, and they would like run in lane 8. We would be doing repeats in lane 1. But one of my teammates was also in ROTC, and I remember one of his buddies was running by, and he was running really slowly, and this guy on my team, he yells out, "Hey cadet, you run like a girl," in front of the entire women's track team. And nobody said anything, and I was just like, I gotta say something. And I was like, excuse me, but there's not a girl on this track that couldn't beat him. And then there's all this backpedaling, but that was one instance where I was like, you can't even be, you know, an elite Division I athlete without men thinking that you're inferior. And then another way that I've always felt treated differently as a female athlete, and I like to talk to men about this because it's something that they just don't experience. But female athletes experience a lot of street harassment. So like, we would go on runs, I remember, as a team, and we would get catcalled, or we would get followed, or we would have men just like taking pictures of us, which is really creepy. And this was just something, you know, I talked to it with my male friends who run as well, and they're just like, that happens? And we're like, yeah, it happens. I mean, all the time it happens. Even just last week, like, I got honked at on a run, you know, so it's like, it's just kind of the things that women have to deal with as athletes.
Yes, so I guess my last sort of final question is, how has sports changed from the time that you ran to now, and how do you see that reflected in the media? Do you think that that will impact younger generations of athletes, and how do the older sort of ones combat that?
Yeah, you know, I wish sports would actually have changed a little bit more since I was an athlete, just because of my research on NCAA policy and the way that I follow athletic issues in the news. There hasn't been a ton of change, and that's really upsetting. So one of the ways that there really hasn't been a ton of change is a lot of people love to talk about the name, image, and likeness conversations that we're having, and everyone's like, oh, athletes are going to get paid now, and I'm like, you were way overly optimistic, you don't know the NCAA. But that's something that bothers me too, because I'm looking at this issue, and I'm just like, this, you know, name, image, and likeness rights are going to significantly impact maybe 1% of top elite male athletes, and so we're ignoring women's issues again. Like, we're ignoring, you know, the fact that the NCAA cleared Michigan State of any rule violations after the Larry Nassar scandal. You know, we're ignoring the fact that there's I think it's a $500,000 pay gap between assistant male coaches and assistant female coaches. That balloons up to $1 million when we're talking head coaches. We're ignoring the fact that there are huge funding discrepancies between men's and women's teams in the NCAA. We're ignoring the fact that there are no rules in the Division I manual that outlaw coach abuse or sexual violence, and so there are all of these, you know, issues that disproportionately affect women and vulnerable athletes. There are no LGBT protections in the Division I manual either, and so that's a very vulnerable population of athletes that aren't being addressed, because we're talking about, we want, you know, we want NCAA video games back, and I'm just like, y'all are missing the point. Like, this is, it's definitely a problem, but it's drowning out issues of more vulnerable athletes. Another thing that hasn't really changed a whole lot since I was in school is the discussion around trans athletes. Because something that I've noticed that has not changed at all is that men only seem to care about women's sports when trans athletes are involved. Then all of a sudden they care about equality, and I'm just like, this is really interesting, because where was this energy when the U.S. women's national team came forward this summer and talked about the pay discrepancies there? Again, like, where was this energy when the Larry Nassar scandal was happening? And so when men talk to me about, like, oh, trans athletes are making everything unfair, I'm just like, could you name 5 WNBA teams for me, please? Would you like to come to a softball game with me this weekend? Did you know that we were playing? Did you know that Texas is undefeated this year? So it's like that kind of energy is very discouraging for me, because I see sports as not having changed a whole lot. And so there are ways that sport needs to advance, ways that sport needs to change. And that's why I think that being critical of sports is so incredibly important, especially as women.
Right. And so what sort of advice, or what would you like going forward for the way that sports are treated, and as well as, more importantly, athletes?
So I think first and foremost, we need more women in leadership in sports. So you look at the stats as far as athletic directors, university presidents, leadership in the NCAA. Female representation in leadership positions is under 5%. Like, it's abysmal. But I do think we need a more feminine perspective in sport, because I think a feminine perspective is not only going to benefit female athletes, it's also going to benefit men. It's going to make sports safer. It's going to make sports reform more comprehensive. It's not going to hurt men by putting women in leadership. And I think that there's this dichotomy between women and men, where, like, when women are in sports, they're viewed as a threat, because sports are it's just such a masculine environment. But I think that women and men should work together. I do think that women need to be in more leadership positions. And I think that men need to step up as well. I think that men need to say, hey, we value women's sports just as much as we value men's sports. And I think that men need to step up to the plate and take some of that responsibility too, because it's a lot of work for women to do this alone.
Well, I think that's a nice place to leave off. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. Oh yeah, I gotta turn it off. Let's see.
I think that looks good.